Hello.
Ah,
Right. It's good to see some of you here. Hi, Shelby.
hello.
Hi, Hillary and Benita.
Hi.
Okay, so it's 5:30, so I'm going to go ahead and start. And I'm not sure how many people will be joining us, but I will be happy to invite them in. They start to join us. So what we're going to do a little bit today is cover topic on special topics in family therapy, and we will talk a little bit about our projects as well. So we'll start there. Hi, Jean.
Hello.
Okay. I also want to say, I know there's only a few of you here, but I have so enjoyed your presentations. They are awesome. I feel like every week I'm learning something new and seeing a new cool way to present. So I really appreciate that. Y'all have done a great job.
Thank you.
All righty. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about some special topics in family therapy. I know that we've covered quite a few theories at this point. And you can apply all of those theories to some specific topics in family therapy, but today we'll cover substance abuse, domestic violence, and child abuse. All important topics that will very much affect your work with families. So let's just jump right in. Well, first of all, has anyone ever worked in a substance abuse setting or had experience with families that have experienced substance abuse?
Yes.
Okay. And obviously you don't have to share anything personal if you don't want to.
Are you wanting my background?
No, it's totally up to you.
I spent 17 years in law enforcement working with folks that have issues every day. I was a case manager for MHMR who would come into the program and have been self-medicating forever. And I have some relatives that have been self-medicating for their entire lives, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it affects, I mean, according to the statistics, it affects 1 in 11 Americans and 1 in 3 families in some way, shape, or form. So it's definitely something that as counselors we're going to be seeing. And I like the way that you mentioned, Jean, self-medication, because comorbid mental health disorders in addition to addiction are extremely common. And so many times people will not know how to handle their bipolar disorder or major depression or anxiety, and they medicate drugs and alcohol.
Even ADD, ADHD, they will self-medicate with meth.
Yeah, that's I hadn't thought about.
Well, and
that for a minute, but
methamphetamines are amphetamines. They're just the garbage version that's made in your toilet or garage. So ADD and ADHD is treated with amphetamines to speed up the rest of the brain so that it works at the same speed as the one portion of the brain that's not. So instead of going to the doctor and getting on regular meds, they find that accidentally methamphetamines work well for them, and then they start doing that.
right. Well, and yeah, I mean, ADHD comes with low self-esteem and some other issues, and so if someone's experimenting and they find something that works for them, then they might start using that. But we know that that can come with a whole host of other problems, of course. And just move you guys over here. And then, of course, alcohol abuse. So we have the problem with illegal illicit drugs, but the more common, very legal drug that people use to self-medicate all the time is alcohol. And so the difference between alcohol abuse and alcohol dependence is Alcohol abuse is problem pattern of drinking. Dependence is when someone tries to stop and they can't. So just to tell you, and thank you, Jean, for sharing. Just to tell you a little bit about my background, I have worked in an inpatient substance abuse rehabilitation facility. So I did learn a lot there and worked with a lot of families. They really do feel that addiction is a family disease, and it can be helped by the family, but it can also be helped by the family. Hi, Laura. Good to see you.
Hi.
So there's that. And then, of course, in my work with families, oh, there are more of you. Hi, Brittany. Hi, Jen. Glad you're able to make it. Okay. Does anyone else want to share, like maybe about their work or background they have with substance abuse issues in families? No?
I'll share well, along Jean's line was my brother-in-law. He died from an OD.
Oh, wow.
But the ironic thing is it wasn't an OD from his normal drug. It was actually the drugs that that he was put on in his therapy that quote unquote help him withdrawal and come off the other drugs. You know, they'll put him on drugs that aren't as
Methadone?
Yeah. So either way, there's these two drugs that they'll put them on that he'll kind of bounce back and forth among. And apparently, if you mix them up or take them in the wrong order, they're lethal. And that's how he ended up dying. Because he took the prescribed drugs while he was in rehab at the wrong time or in the wrong combination. And that's how he died.
Wow.
So
heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that like some of the drugs, methadone's the one I'm most familiar with, but I know there are others, have a bit of I guess a high that comes with them, but it's more muted.
Yeah.
And so I could see how someone who has an addiction problem might struggle with that and overtake their meds.
You know, it's interesting. Well, at least my background is in, I've worked with a lot of women that are, whose husbands are addicted to pornography. And so anyway, so that's my background is working with women that are trying to resolve the fact that why is my husband looking at this stuff? Aren't I good enough? And things like that. And that the pornography, the addiction doesn't come from them, because saying it's a family issue makes them feel like this is my fault.
Sure. Yeah. And that's a little bit different. But, you know, addiction does hijack the brain in similar ways. I guess the reason I say that it can be a family issue is more of the enabling behaviors that have to do with substance abuse specifically. But yeah, I mean, pornography addiction is definitely real. And any type of addiction in the family throws the whole system out of balance. So it's not necessarily that it's the family's fault. It's that it can make the entire system a little dysfunctional or unhealthy. And it can be really tough to kind of break those patterns. Yeah. And actually, gosh, there's some interesting research on pornography addiction. I'm sure that you've read about how it actually impacts the man's ability to perform sexually as well.
Yeah.
It takes more and more.
Satisfaction's like nil, and while they're addicted to porn, because they're creating this virtual world, this virtual imaginary world that just isn't real.
Yeah, and it takes more and more shock factor to get aroused.
And then they put the shock factor on their wife, saying, "Come on, do more, shock me more," and so that makes them feel even more guilty.
That's tough.
Yeah,
I'm glad that you do that and that you help. Okay, we'll move on a little bit. I'm not going to go too deep into all these definitions because I know you know what alcoholism is, but also we go into that a little bit more in the diagnosis class, so you'll get a whole section on that. But I do want to kind of show this. I want to show this clip really quickly. I hope my computer doesn't get overloaded. But this is a brand new Netflix film that I watched that really kind of drove some of the issues home.
Oh, you look good.
Thank you.
Better.
Okay. So close. Is this a shirt or a dress? I mean, I think it could be either of those things. If you have to ask yourself, maybe it's not the best choice.
Sorry, guys.
Who are you?
I'm your brother and you love me so much.
Can I just roll up your sleeve? Show me your arm.
Where's Seth?
He went home.
I'll be fine. I just need a little bit.
I have done everything for you. Don't say that you understand. It's like the worst thing that you can say.
The last time was so...
Okay.
The last time.
It's okay.
The last time.
Sorry, guys. I'm trying to shrink different things to make it easier to see.
It's okay. It's okay.
Okay. So that was a little too much internet, I think, for my little computer to handle. So I'm sorry for a little bit of it wasn't the easiest to watch, but check that out. I think it's pretty pertinent with the opioid crisis that's happening right now that seems to be impacting so many families. Basically, the story is about a sister who is throwing a surprise party for her boyfriend, and she goes to pick up her brother and realizes that he's high. And obviously he was a heroin addict. He's tried to get clean multiple times. So the film is showing her night, and she's trying to get him. He's got his daughter with her. She's trying to get him to a facility that will take him. And one thing after another comes up, and he can't seem to make it to a rehab facility based on his insurance and different things. So she's driving all around, and he becomes sick, very, very, very sick. And at one point I don't want to spoil it for you if you're interested in watching it. It's a bit of a downer, but it does kind of highlight some of the ways in which the entire family gets thrown off balance because they're either trying to cover for the substance abuser, or they're trying to get them help, but they're running out of resources, or putting themselves in situations that are unsafe because they're worried or afraid for their family member. So those are some of the big issues that come up. And so sometimes that the family can, in fact, support or enable the behavior to go on. Some of it comes from families using together in crisis or connection, particularly if like a patriarch or matriarch of the family has an addiction problem. Maybe the children start to use with the parent, enabling or protecting. And that's what we kind of see the sister doing. She's lying to the family because he begs her, oh, don't tell mom because she's going to be heartbroken if she finds out that I have to go back into treatment again. And she's lying to her boyfriend saying, I'll be there in 5 minutes, different things like that. And then, of course, there are genetic components in family history that kind of perpetuate the problem. And of course, addiction can be passed on and learned by children, which can result in life-ruining or ending consequences. And we talked a little bit about families using together. But even in non-addictive substance abusing families, sometimes if those are the coping skills that are learned by the children in the family, if they learn that mom or dad drinks 5 beers every time they have a stressful day, then they might start to do the same. And with addicted individuals or sometimes substance abusing individuals, the developmental stages are disrupted. A lot of times in inpatient therapy, they say that the person will get clean, but they're sort of stunted at the developmental level at which they started using. And this can be, of course, on a continuum in varying degrees, but you'll often see that sometimes either the coping skills, emotional maturity, or ways of managing life are stunted. And then they have to sort of rebuild and start over and learn how to be a grown-up in some ways. Does anyone have any thoughts about that so far, or about the film?
I have a question. It seems to me, in the patterns that I've observed just in my own family, and we've got a family we've got lots of family history, lots of family dysfunction, like everybody else and their dog, right?
Yeah.
I don't think there's such a thing as a functional family anymore. But the thing is like down one family line, there's like porn addiction and sexual abuse, and down another family line, there's ADHD and drug abuse. And so the thing is, some of the patterns I've recognized, it seems like nowadays there should be almost less of like the physical of the drug abuse because of electronics. Because I'm seeing how, my husband struggled with drug abuse when he was a teenager. My kids, when they get in those same stressful ADHD moments where he turned to drugs, they turn to electronics. And
I kind of wonder the same. I think that's a really interesting point, Jen. I was actually thinking about this the other day because there are more outlets than there used to be that are accessible and in the home, as opposed to
and I mean, it's debatable on what you want to call as healthy and not healthy.
Sure.
I don't know if mind wasting on on a Castle Chase or on whatever is your big game that you're hooked on your computer to. I mean, wasting time is wasting time, but at least you're not detrimentally killing your body, maybe killing your brain, but still. But I wonder, it seems to me it's the same symptoms, and it's just coping. It's just how do you choose to cope?
Yeah, no, you're so right. And actually, at a recent conference I went to, and this is definitely not my area of research, but at the Texas School Counseling Association conference, the issue of violence in schools came up, and in the connection with video games. And one of the presenters was saying that actually the video games are a release, and research supports that. That it can be a coping skill for some to get their anger out and get their frustration out. But I can't speak to that in depth because it's not something I've really read up on, but I think you are onto something there. I do.
Mm-hmm. Because they're still just dodging their emotions. They still don't know what to do with it. So I'm going to go and blow up a bunch of people on Battlefield, on Battlefront, so I don't blow up and punch out people with my hands.
Yeah, well, and distraction can be a good coping skill, at times.
If you don't have the skills to release it and let it go,
sure.
What else are you supposed to do?
Right. Yeah. So, interesting point to bring up. Okay, we will move on. So some of the unhealthy patterns that emerge in the family system include shielding the abuser from negative consequences of their actions. So this is the typical, I'm going to bail my kid out of jail and buy the most expensive attorney and make sure that their future is set and on a path. And we're just going to talk to our son or daughter and let it go and move on and kind of deny that something's going on, which leads us to denial, the making excuses, oh, they're just tired, they're immature. And these are very, very, very powerful coping skills for the family that are maladaptive, as you can imagine. Because it's very, very difficult for a parent to admit that their son or daughter is addicted to something or using. So it's just a lot easier for them to make excuses or to deny that it's happening rather than face the issue. But of course, we know that can lead to detrimental ends. And of course, addiction impacts the entire family, and it can result in feelings of confusion, negative feelings, and despondency, and can impact identity formation and future relationships, particularly affecting the ability to trust or set healthy boundaries. So a lot of times if family members are learning that they need to cover for someone in the family for inexcusable behavior, or they're doing it regardless of whether they agree with it, it's a lot harder later on to know intuitively this is not okay behavior, or this is acceptable behavior, or I should be setting this boundary with someone and not allowing this to go on. So does that make sense to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. And so then that brings us to the family roles, which these are talked about a lot in inpatient facilities when they bring families in. So the enabler, which is the primary family member who covers for the addict and allows the behavior and some substance abuse to become worse. So that could be the grandma that always slips the grandson a 20, or lies to mom saying that they were over at the house, but they weren't. And you can think of like, well, maybe you guys can, what do you think would be a motivating factor to enable?
Guilt, grief.
Yeah,
Love.
I was going to say guilt too, because my brother-in-law is an alcoholic, and his now ex-wife reached out to the family, mainly the mom. My husband's mom is sort of the alpha, head of the house kind of deal, and asked for them to help do an intervention, which I know we read that these days they don't usually do that sort of confrontational intervention, but this was probably almost a decade ago, so that was probably still the mainline way. So she asked to do that, and the mom said no, and said that wasn't the case, and she was overreacting, and like shamed the sister-in-law. And then now he's so far down the rabbit hole, the whole family recognizes that should have happened. Even if they had thought it then, they wouldn't have spoken up because mom rules, and her guilt is a huge part of it. And so her coping mechanism is always denial and excuses. So she's very much a sweep it under the rug and wants the more stress she gets, the more she tries to control and make the family look perfect, which is exactly the opposite of what would help, because everything's crumbling, and then this person is trying to make everything look good on the surface. So, and I think deep down, I don't want to judge her because I'm not close to her, I don't really know, but from what I can see, it's an extreme amount of guilt. And also, like you were saying about how it's really a family disease, is that would make her have to confront things inside of herself, even beyond guilt, and issues that she, some deep-seated unhealthy issues that she had that did contribute to this. It's not her fault that he's an alcoholic, but a lot of the way they were raised come from really unhealthy things. It's like a cycle of abuse, just like we see somebody abuses their son and then their son becomes abusive. This is part of her cycle. So even beyond guilt, it would force her to have to kind of have an intervention about herself. Yeah. And that gets really tricky when you have to do some deep searching in a painful area too.
Oh, I think that is a really good point, Benita. Yes. I think guilt. I'm not a parent, so I can't speak to this, but that's a lot of responsibility, right? Being a parent, and you're gonna make mistakes, and life is messy, and we carry all our baggage from our past, and we can analyze ourselves and work on ourselves, but at the end of the day, we're human, and we aren't always gonna get it right, and so that's I mean, a huge component just right there. And then you take the and in that desire to protect, to give to your children, to make sure they're okay, that's natural, and it's there from day one. So to step in and enable someone almost just feels like feeding them or making sure they're okay. But then there's also, like you said, looking at the deeper issues. So, well, if I have multiple drinks in a night, but I've always been able to stop, and I don't get behind the wheel of a car, and I'm fine, and I don't have any health problems, but I'm 65 and I've been doing this my whole life. But my child is a heroin addict. Clearly the child is in danger of dying, but maybe I'm not. But I'm still contributing if I'm using substances around my child, or this level of substance abuse is okay, but this isn't. It's still the same unfortunate cycle. And that takes a lot to dig deep and address those underlying issues. So I think you're right on there. Same thing in partnerships. Alcoholics often attract other alcoholics. So if one person gets clean, what does the other person do? And does the other person really want the other person to get clean? So it can get really deep and complicated. You're right. Does anyone else have anything to contribute about that?
Okay, I have something to say. Sorry, I'm probably going to talk a lot because this chapter is my chapter. This is like what I'm going into is helping couples and families with child abuse and abuse issues in their background. But something I teach in my couples class is that we look at families as like this shiny light of holiness and love and wonderfulness, and it is, and they are, and it's amazing for me to see and show people that yes, your family is going to be your source of your greatest joys in life, but you don't understand your family is also going to be your source of greatest personal development, because they are going to reflect and throw back to you all of your junk, and you can't run from it, you can't hide from it. You have to sit there and address. I mean, you can run, and even the women that have gotten divorced and that have gone through my class are like, whoa, I see the divorce was totally me. I was blaming him, but he was just showing me my junk. And it's like, but with kids, you can't run from your kids. And they are sitting there reflecting back, like the heroin addict is reflecting maybe the mom's issue of, I can't deal with my own addiction issues, my own emotional healing that's not there. And when you get to that point where you can see, yes, my family is my greatest blessing, but they're also going to be your greatest trial. But the yin and yang of it all really is beautiful. It really is. And the more you run from it and you say, oh no, no, kids are evil, I'm not going to be bothered by kids, and no, my husband, I'm going to talk bad about him behind his back and stuff like that, in the long run, it's your own personal development that you're running from. Because though your family members are your greatest, they are your best friends as far as how they are serving you and how they are teaching you and where your greatest growth can come from. I mean, you can just choose to embrace it, enjoy, or you can choose to run from it in fear. But anyway, I'll just hang from my soapbox.
No, I totally agree with you that, I mean, there's a continuum of families, and some are so toxic that it's sometimes important to get away from them. But that in and of itself is also a learning experience, right?
Oh yeah.
But you're right.
If you're going to grow, you get to choose to grow through pain or through joy. It's like, how are you going to choose to grow?
Right.
You could stay in that abusive relationship until you grow to a point where you actually stand up for yourself and you have the guts to stand up for yourself and grow in that way. Or you can step out and say, I'm going to produce a new life. I'm going to step into my joy.
Yeah.
I'm going to love me before we.
Right. And setting boundaries with your family in that case.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. So
yeah.
it's you're going to grow either way. It's just how do you choose to grow, through joy or through pain?
Right. Those are some really great points. Thanks for sharing that. So we have the enabler. We have the family hero or the golden child, an adult or child in the family who functions in an overly compensatory way to give the family worth. This is the straight A student, all the extracurricular activities, the person in the family that everyone can be proud of to say that we're not dysfunctional, everything's okay. Scapegoat. So in the book, it doesn't really describe the scapegoat as the user, but in the treatment facilities I've worked in, that was typically the person that was the family scapegoat. But it could be a child that acts out or who's blamed for the family's problems. But it's really easy for everyone to go, well, if little Johnny would just get clean, everything would be fine again. But we know that it's more complicated than that. And as we, just discussed, there are layers and layers to this and ways that family members can support someone struggling with addiction or continue to contribute to that dynamic. And then the lost child is someone who suffers from rejection and loneliness, but who's never really causes a racket. Just the quiet, sad person in the corner. And the clown can provide humor and comedic relief to reduce tension. So you can see varieties of these different roles play out in addictive family systems. And it can impact people for the rest of their lives. So they might always be this role or take on some of these roles if they're not aware of it. And then how to help. So you could go the intervention route or at least a confrontation with a family member. Inpatient and outpatient treatment can be recommended. Of course, Alcoholics Anonymous, or I didn't put NA, but Narcotics Anonymous, Al-Anon, or adult children of alcoholics, and family therapy can help to sort of unpack these different roles and look at the dysfunctional patterns, maybe doing even a genogram to look at the family history. Prioritizing sobriety is kind of the first step in this, though, and it's not going to be very effective if family members are continuing to use. And addressing the substance abuse of all family members, of course, is an important part of this. All right, before we move on, any other thoughts about substance abuse? I know we're kind of flying through it because we have 3 different sections to look at, but.
No, we're good.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe just think about your own family to yourself or families you've worked with and see if any of these roles apply. And then this wasn't an exhaustive list. Of course, there are, religious-based programs that can possibly help, or it was just broad about inpatient and outpatient treatment, but there are a lot of programs out there. All right, domestic violence. So I'm going to be really honest about domestic violence. This is not an area that I have much expertise on. So if you do, by all means, please share. But obviously, domestic violence is aggression that takes place in intimate relationships, usually between adults. intimate partner violence, intimidation, sexual assault, financial, emotional, or other types of abusive behavior. It can happen to anyone in any type of romantic relationship, but can be higher in veteran populations with PTSD. One of the stats from the book is that 1 in 4 households in the UK experience intimate partner violence. And in Canada, half of women 16 and older report at least one incident of intimate partner violence. That was a little shocking to me, actually.
That's all those Me Too'ers, right?
I don't know if sexual assault was included in that, but it could have been.
Why is that shocking to you?
Yeah.
Well, I know. It was when I read it, and then I thought, that's a little shocking to me, but then I started thinking about women and status in society and the Me Too'ers and sexual assault, and it became less shocking to me.
Wait a second. I'd like to, point out something here.
Yeah, go ahead.
You started with women, Me Too. You left out a whole group of folks there. That's men.
Yep. And men are victims of, intimate partner violence as well, not to leave them out. Although it does happen to women at much higher rates statistically. But you are right.
It's reported at much higher rates for women. Men just don't report it because they don't like, that's an ego issue.
Yeah.
And it damages their menness.
That's a great point. I think you're probably right on. And as a former police officer, I'm sure that you've been to a variety of domestic violence scenes and no one went to jail, or they didn't want to actually.
Oh, no. Someone always goes to jail. It is a law. If there is an assault, if there's a domestic incident, there will be one person removed from the house.
Right.
The law enforcement professionals do not have a choice in that matter. You will remove one subject. Now, who you remove can be voluntary on the part of the participants, or if you can discern who it is that started the altercation, you can take them.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you for bringing that up. Not to mention that transgender individuals are also a part of this. I didn't want to leave out gender variant individuals.
But if you want to see, we have a live dispatch feed from the city police department, and you can set one evening and just simply watch how many calls go out for assaults and how many removals there are just in an evening. Super Bowl weekend is always a beat your mate weekend.
Wow.
That's what most of your calls are on the Super Bowl is assault, family violence.
Wow, that's surprising to me.
There's a lot of drinking going on that weekend.
This isn't my area, and it's undoubtedly rooted in, I guess, my past. I mean, my history was a little more fraught with the substance abuse issues than the domestic violence, but obviously it's a huge issue and can be perpetuated in some similar ways. Covering up, denying, enabling, hiding, fear, all those things contribute deeply to continuing and exacerbating the dynamic.
And when you go out, let's say the wife calls, you go out, he's beat the crap out of her or the kids or whatever, or her partner has. When you go to intervene, now they don't want you to take them away. They will actually jump on you and fight you to keep you from taking the other subject away.
Right. So I think it's really worthy to get some extra training in how to work with people who are struggling with intimate partner violence, because that cycle, apparently, from what I've read, it takes 9 times of trying to leave before someone actually leaves the situation, if they ever do. And there are so many forms of control that can be used to keep someone in an unhealthy dynamic. And I think you make a really good point, Jean, there about how they don't want to be in an unsafe situation, but once it's over, they feel more comfortable in the calm.
Well, if you take their subject away, if you take the breadwinner, usually that's the person that has the job or whatever.
Right.
If you throw them in there and take them away, rent doesn't get paid.
Yeah.
They have to go bail them out of jail. They're the circumstances after they get out of jail and sober up or whatever it is are often worse than if we just came there and separated them and gave them a minute. But we don't have the option to just separate them. So a lot of times when I said, a volunteer will go, you will find that the person that called you that has actually been beat on will volunteer to go and not send the aggressor.
Well, and honestly, that's maybe in the short term one of their smarter options if the person that's supporting them financially is going to lose their job. Or there are so many issues in that situation that need to be addressed. A lot of them stem from substance abuse, poor childhood, psychological damage, mental health issues. That's one of those. It's like, I'm going to assume dealing with alcoholism. You start out with one issue, and as you dig that hole, you just simply discover that goes all the way to China, and there's so many things in it. You're going to be in therapy forever. Right. Well, and it's so deep that it's very hard to break out of that relationship or that cycle unless the abuser takes full responsibility for the behavior and truly seeks help.
And usually what you find is the abuser doesn't. You wind up later on going out to a scene where a subject is now deceased. That's happened multiple times.
Yeah. It's really awful. As we're on this page now, the power and control wheel, I'm not going to go through this because I know you can all read. But does anyone have a comment about this or questions or thoughts about the power and control wheel or how this cycle can kind of continue to perpetuate?
Other than it's the premise for our entire history as humanity.
Well, that's
pretty much what we've been doing since the dawn of time.
It is true. On a large scale political level, this is kind of what we're all still doing, isn't it? But yeah, I think if we're looking at families, it's pretty obvious what can keep someone entrenched in this pattern. And also, aside from the obvious, we kind of touched on economic abuse and, sort of the stability piece as far as like just basic needs. But the few clients that I have worked with that are in this situation are so beaten down emotionally that their confidence is gone. They start to question their own value and question their instincts. They're gaslighted on such a deep level that they don't know how to trust themselves and what normality should even look like anymore. And so it makes sense to just stay in that pattern of control because it's a very powerful force. So, and, they're so emotionally beaten down and abused that they're too tired to work on it or fix it, from what I can see, just on the psychological level. Also, it could be that family pattern of abuse, just like the substance abuse pattern where, well, it's normal to have 10 drinks a night, or it's normal to get slapped, but it's not normal to get beaten up. So maybe the threshold or the boundaries are just a little bit skewed based on maybe family history.
Yeah. I know with the women that I work with, something that I really have to help them with is, being raped by their husbands. And they're like, well, no, I wasn't raped because he's my husband. So it's my marital obligation to, have sex with him. But at the same time, she doesn't want anything to do with it. And at the same time, the guy, and it's funny because sometimes the women are just like, oh, I'm such the victim. I'm like, but helping them see it from the guy's point of view. Sarah, please stop. The guy's point of view is, yes, but for how long have you had a headache, honey? You don't want him to use porn. You don't want him to go out and have an affair, but you've had a headache and not wanted to be with him for 6 months. And you see how it all plays together. You're playing the victim, but you're actually the one in control. Way more than you think you are. And they don't realize the power they wield and how much a guy's sexual drive, how much power that has over a guy. And it's like you're saying he can't have an affair, he can't watch it porn, but he's got all this pent-up drive inside of him that he needs to get out. And according to the agreement that you guys made, the only way he can get that out is through being with you. But you don't want to be with him. So you have to look at both sides of the corner. It's like, I know maybe
and I
have your own issues.
hear you on that, and I think that might be a little bit different of an issue from the abuse and rape piece, because if someone's raped, they may not ever want to touch their husband again. And that's an almost normal dramatic response to something like that. But I hear what you're saying.
Rape is an act of aggression that comes from power. It's not a sexual issue.
That'd be interesting to talk. What is the difference in the line? Because I deal with this a lot with the women I talk with. They're like, well, it's my husband, so it's not a rape. But
there is such a thing as spousal rape, and it took quite. This was actually, unfortunately, only put on the in law way too recently. I can't remember the exact years, but I want to say it was the 90s before.
Yeah, you had rules in some places where you could still beat your wife. You could beat her, but you couldn't beat her to death. That was an abuse. And then it got to the point where basically when we started teaching no means no is roughly the time when it went on. And it doesn't go in the books in every state at the same time. It is a effect that's like a wave.
I think for all the states to get on board with.
And rape is rape. If you say no, and there is any penetration by a digit for sexual gratification, that is considered rape, no matter who does it.
Okay.
So yeah, it has to be consensual for it to be considered not be rape.
So it is more of so it is a control thing.
Yeah. That's about power. That's about control. That's about, it's about taking and asserting power. It can be considered rooted deeply in misogyny. Part of it's rooted in misogyny, part of it's rooted in abuse, or both. But I think what you're talking about is a little bit different. Maybe underlying issues that affect drive or different aspects of the relationship that can impact desire. That's a little bit different from rape. This idea. It always has to be consensual to not be considered rape.
Okay. So, okay. So even if the man is using coercive methods, if she agrees, even though she hates it, and she may consider it in her mind that it's rape because it wasn't her idea, she didn't want to do it, but if she says yes, then it's not rape.
Well, I think there's the argument that people in relationships might have sex with their partners for a variety of reasons, maybe without desire, But if they're choosing it, then it's not considered rape. If they're saying yes, it's not considered rape.
Okay. So yes, I guess that's what I need. I need a concrete definition, maybe even a legal definition.
It's basically, unless the partner is getting someone intoxicated, because if they're intoxicated, then that's
still rape. You have to, if you are looking for the legal definition of rape, it is penetration of a person via a digit for sexual gratification. It doesn't matter if it's girl on girl, guy on guy, guy on girl, child, adult. If you have a digit and you penetrate anywhere, if I put my finger in your nose and it is for sexual gratification and someone obtains climax, that is considered non-consensual as far as the law is concerned. It's rape. We'll file charges and an investigation will ensue. That is completely different from what happens in a psychological matter or therapy and what you feel when you are dealing with your emotions. The law and the emotions they're not married, they're not friends, they don't hang out in bars together. What the law does and what therapy is are two totally different beasts.
Yeah, and I would encourage you to look up the law too, because I have looked at it multiple times, because sometimes you have to get technical with it. Sexual assault, there's a whole laundry list of things there. Because statutory rape, there's a whole, like the age of consent, it gets complicated. But yeah, I would look into all of that. Just encourage you to look into all of those as well.
And penal codes are online. You can switch over to Google and look it up right now and read the penal code on it.
Yep.
Yeah, because some of these women that I work with, I mean, they consider, or at least they might have the emotional effects of, like, they feel like they were raped, and they say, well, he tricked me into it, or he got me drunk, or he tricked me into it. I didn't really want to. But it comes down to, if you said yes, then that was yes.
Well, it's complicated, especially with intoxication. I mean, the point is consent, though. If you were in your right mind and you said yes.
Are you wanting to get the law involved in something at some point?
I don't, but the thing is some of these women get so into the drama that they want some kind of outside validation for their pain.
Because I was just going to say, if you plan on involving the legal profession in anything, it's going to get very uncomfortable for the potential victim.
I know, and that's why I guess I'm trying to get definitions about it so I can counsel these women of, like, look, don't make this more than it is, and be careful what you're calling it.
Yeah. And so in that case, I would definitely encourage you to look online and come in with some laws.
Because sometimes they're juicing the drama, and it's like, don't be saying my husband raped me, because you could be looking into a lot bigger of a mountain than what actually might have happened. And
not because even that assertion, there's a lot of stuff going on that needs to be addressed on a personal and relational level.
Can I just chime in real quick?
Yes.
This even relates back to when we were talking about how men get abused too, which is totally the case, and then what we're talking about now. This is just my opinion, but I think in the counseling field, because we're looking for a specific definition of rape, and we're saying, okay, also men can get abused, men can be raped too, actually, and all these things. We do need to know legal definitions of things. That's a part of our job, because we need to know how to report things. But our job really is to just counsel each individual. And if a woman felt violated by her husband, I'm not so sure it would matter whether or not she fit the definition legal criteria of rape in a counseling perspective, as far as our ability to counsel that person was traumatized, even if she said yes. Part of the whole thing with the Me Too movement is when someone is in a position of power over you, you can say yes, which maybe isn't the right thing to do, but you're saying yes often out of a cycle of abuse. You might be shocked, you might be stunned, you may not want the fight, you may not want to get beaten up, and that would still, to me, be not consensual as far as me counseling my client. I don't know that that's non-consensual as far as legal terms go, but I just say that to say, like, and not to negate the fact that men also get abused. That is very serious and of equal concern. But part of the Me Too thing, part of things that we've learned about in all of our classes, like even white privilege, is that there is something different when historically someone in society has had the power. So it's not that it's not okay, it's okay for men to be abused, but when there's sort of this female oppression that is centered around them feeling like they have to say yes, whether it's to a husband or someone who's abusive, we can't negate that as counselors too, because as far as everything I've read in every class and all of our texts, we have a job that is also social justice as well, and advocating for our clients in that way. So I do think the legal stuff is important, but it would be dangerous, I think, to say, were you asking for it? Well, you did say yes. Well, you know, you're not the only one who gets abused. If we had a client that we felt like was just looking for drama, then we would be needing to assess underlying issues for why they would go so far as to say they were raped by their husband, but not necessarily come from a stance of questioning whether or not that was valid, like from a legal point of view. You know what I mean? Like, we have to just meet each person where they're at. So for some women, somebody could have sexually assaulted them and they don't feel stressed or PTSD from it. They're just like, that guy's a jerk, this is not my problem. And some women, it might be something so subtle and it traumatized them. So we're not the ones who define for our clients what is allowed to be considered abuse in that sense. We do have to define abuse in a legal sense. I do agree with that, but I don't know that I just feel like we might be getting carried away. Like, we don't want to tell people it's not really rape because you said yes. We're supposed to be exploring whatever trauma they felt from feeling like they were forced to have sex with their husband. Because I can speak from, not from a sexual abuse point of view, I can speak from a physical and emotional abuse point of view, and growing up in that household, you do a lot of saying yes when you don't want to, because you want to avoid something
getting your ass pumped.
Yeah, you want to avoid it. That doesn't mean I really was actually consenting.
And that's why I said the legal aspect of it and the counseling aspect of it are two totally different monsters.
Right. So I don't think we don't need to get a definition legally. I just think that could be lost in the minutia, and you'd have to look at your client and ask them why they felt compelled to say yes if that's not what they really wanted. And that, it's kind of like, and to also look at this social justice issue that traditionally women do feel like they don't have the power to say no. That's to me a broader social justice issue. So it's not taking away from the fact that men get abused, but it's looking at this particular problem in our society of women in general feeling like they can't say no. That was the stress of the Me Too movement, that all these women were told, why didn't you just say no or get away from me? But they felt in jeopardy. They felt like somebody was more powerful than they were, and they couldn't say no. And I can guarantee, having seen my mom be abused all the time, she never told my dad no. Why would you ever do that if the consequence was huge?
Getting your face punched in. Yeah.
Right. Part of this wheel, just to bring it back to class, part of this wheel that I found so intriguing, which is because I think my dad pretty much did all of them to my mom, is that a lot of times the physical stuff and that type of thing is the result of when the abuser feels like the emotional abuse didn't work. If they're not getting what they need out of intimidating you, cutting you off financially, whatever, they lose their cool. And so now it's going to be physical or sexual, because it's going to be whatever it takes to get you to submit. So yes is not always yes. I think that's really only the point I'm trying to make, and to say, as counselors, we have to just meet each client where they're at. I don't know that we're going to get a universal, this is what's considered, you're allowed to be traumatized by this kind of explanation.
I hear you on that. One way I think that I think, thank you so much for your insight. And I think you make really great points about how this ties directly into abusive relationships. One way I think that the legal definition can be empowering for people who have experienced sexual assault in any way is by normalizing that what happened to them was in fact an assault or was in fact rape. Because it can be, one, difficult to face, two, lots of guilt and blame, and particularly if there are other components and coercion and abuse, happening to the victim. It can be hard for them to know that that was an actual assault. So that can be really powerful. But yeah, I mean, as you were speaking, Benita, because it can validate them in the sense that, oh yeah, this was a violation of me. I didn't do anything wrong. But also it just ties directly to this wheel, right? And you're so right that if someone's intimidating or threatening the money or threatening to take children away or threatening to beat them up, and they're coercing them into some sort of activity, that's not consent either. So that's a good point. Does anyone else have anything else they want to say about the power and control wheel? Nope. Okay. We'll move on from that then. And so, yeah, Jean, I was thinking about this as you were talking about Super Bowl weekend, that drugs and alcohol can influence abusive behavior, but it's not an excuse. There are plenty of people who abuse substances or just use substances that do not or abuse while they're under the influence.
Mom,
And of course, multi-generational patterns of abuse can influence.
Is it like
And it can be like he's crying, but do you mind if you mute yourself or if I mute you?
Mom, what's the wheel?
Oh, I'm sorry, my daughter.
I'll mute you. Okay. So I love it though that we have kids in our class, by the way. I think it's really cool. That's one neat thing about the online, how online classes can actually work, is that you guys can have your kiddies here, and they're very cute too. So, all right. And then we have, a hostage captor situation where we've talked a little bit about this. Control can just manifest in so many different varieties: emotional, financial, physical. It can just go on and on, the manipulation. So it can be very challenging to get out of these relationships, which is why I definitely say I'm far from an expert on helping in this arena. But individually, I have dealt with quite a few people who have experienced abuse in their current romantic relationships or from their past. Okay. So obviously, to be effective counselors, we have to be diligent about assessing the level of violence. It's really, really important that you're not counseling couples that are highly violent. It's not safe, to encourage continuing a relationship that's in which physical violence is happening regularly, because it can, as Jean said, end up being lethal. So you want to make sure that there's not violence before you're counseling couples. So there's a couple definitions from the book. Common couple violence, which is low-level violence initiated by either women or men that is infrequent and non-injurious. And then there's severe abusive violence or intimate partner violence. The battering, which is, battering of or patriarchal / intimate terrorism, which can be physically injurious, meant to intimidate, and largely perpetuated by men against women. That's in 2008. It definitely happens in same-sex relationships of all kinds. So it's not to say that women cannot be, repeatedly injurious or batter their partners. It's just that at this point, as far as we know, and I think you made a great point, Jean, about often this can go unreported, that this can be men perpetrating against women. And so we want you, when you're assessing clients, you want to be extra careful, to be non-judgmental, to ask open-ended questions. Focus on it as something that hurts the whole family, including the perpetrator, which is true, to elicit the most information. You want to be very careful to not have anyone shut down, although it's very possible that, the intimidated or controlled party will shut down anyway, because they're not in a safe situation to share. Does anyone have anything to say about that, about the assessment process? Or
I always found it was difficult when I would do reports. Somebody would call same-sex relationships. If they hadn't come out of the closet yet, they would have a very difficult time relaying the information and then deciding to prosecute, because basically when you tell somebody, when you file a report, you've outed yourself and it's now public. So I found a lot of times same-sex did not want to out each other or themselves to the public when they hadn't come out of the closet.
That's a really good point. And I think it also brings to light how hard it is for people to actually call the police or make a report for that reason, regardless. But that does obviously add a complication, because
it's public. All of it is.
It's in record.
Yeah, you can't hide it. Your name is not there initially, but by the time it hits the court, you're public. So
then you're out.
And if you haven't told your parents, the last thing you want to do is tell a total stranger that's there to potentially take your mate away.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah,
and it dramatically changes the dynamic. And like here in counseling, it doesn't really make a difference in the end as to whether or not you tell me that it was your roommate or your mate that abused you. You're not going to file charges on them. This is a safe place. But when you're telling a law enforcement professional, it changes the dynamic, because the charges go up. If you're just a roommate and you get into a fist fight, it's just an assault. But if you actually are an intimate partner, then it's assault family violence, and now the charges have gone up. And it makes it a much different crime.
Right. That's a really good point. Well, and it's yeah, for it, and there is the LGBT component, but for anyone having that on paper, it's kind of hard to turn back.
It's embarrassing and very humiliating and extremely public.
You can't deny it. You have to face it.
And that's like they were talking earlier about the sexual assault. In the legal world, you are almost victimized twice, and depending on how you view it, you are victimized twice when you report it, because the process that you go through in the legal field after sexual assault is just as traumatic as the actual assault.
Absolutely. And you're re-solidifying that trauma every time you talk about it, particularly if there's a lawyer trying
Well, it's not just that. I mean, initially, you take them to the hospital. They must publicly answer questions to medical professionals. There will be a rape test kit, no matter what your gender.
Right.
And a rape test kit is not a pretty thing.
Right.
And you're going to answer question and repeatedly from different people. And then, we're going to advise you to seek counseling. We may even drag in a total stranger counselor who's going to do a rush job on you, and then you're going to go into a whole process with lawyers and several other things. So yeah, it's a real serious secondary victimization after the crime.
Right. And similar, like you were saying with domestic violence, if there were children present, there's automatically an open CPS case. So now the person who's been victimized is under scrutiny by the state about whether or not they're a fit parent. And then if the perpetrator is also the breadwinner, you can see the conundrum that
And there are no women that want to take their kids and go to a shelter. That's not a place where they want to be.
No.
The idea itself is just traumatic to them. To just grab an overnight bag with some underwear and a toothbrush and jump in the back of a car and be driven to a strange place where you're going to sleep in maybe a hotel setting. Otherwise, it's a cot setting like the Mission.
Well, and it brings up very real questions about what can I provide my child without this financial support, without this stability of a home, if that's the case. But yeah, lots of complicated layers and issues, which is why the assessment piece is so delicate and challenging. And you can see why it's so difficult for people to leave sometimes. Okay. There are a few theories that can be applied to domestic violence to help. Intimate justice theory, which encompasses ethical dimensions and ethical concepts. Therapists confront, challenge, explore, and educate about abuse and power in family systems. They confront disempowerment and abuses of power in a partnership while challenging internalized beliefs about how one should treat one's partner. And then there's education based on IJ and CBT theories. But of course, all of these are applied to someone who's willing, someone who's admitted that they have a problem and that wants help. It's not going to work at all if someone doesn't want the help, obviously. So let's move on, unless there's anything. Does anyone else have anything to say about domestic violence or about the challenges there? This is just an overview. You'll need a whole
Have you noticed
years of experience to be effective.
It's just me, you, and Brittany in here now. Everybody else's kids, dogs, and stuff have loaded up on them.
No, I'm here. I'm still here. You guys don't want to see my stuff.
I'm still here. All right. Well, and I think they can all hear it. They can hear us too. So, okay, child abuse and neglect. Another, I feel like all three of these topics need an entire class, basically. So we are just skimming through these. But, we're kind of trying to focus on how to help the family. Child abuse and neglect. CPS, and this is one that it doesn't matter what area of counseling you go into, you will be making child abuse reports. You will be working with this stuff. So, it's important to talk about, obviously. So CPS received more than 3.3 million reports for alleged maltreatment of nearly 6 million children in 2013. So child abuse obviously is defined as physical, sexual, psychological, or neglect and abandonment types of abuse. This does not surprise me at all, because I've worked with kids a lot in my work. So unfortunately, made a lot of reports. The effects of child abuse are wide-ranging and varied, and they can result in aggression, suicidal thoughts, cognitive and academic consequences, depression and self-esteem, relationship problems, and a powerful influence on behavior that can be lifelong. It can occur on a continuum from mild to severe, the abuse and the consequences of the abuse. So basically, child abuse can affect children in such a wide variety of ways. Does anyone have anything that they want to share about that, or thoughts they have? I like to think of all of these, it's so hard to put down, well, these are the consequences or effects of child abuse. And I'm realizing I used the wrong effect, but that's okay. So yeah, you have to think about these as on a continuum. It can result in PTSD. It cannot. Some children are resilient. Some struggle in a variety of different ways. And we just have to work with each client individually, because each person is different. Temperament and disposition is different. The level of abuse can vary. It can just manifest in so many different ways. But we did kind of cover, some of the things: PTSD, fear, distrust, delinquency, severe depression and anxiety, difficulty forming lasting relationships with peers and adults, cognitive impairment, poor school performance, and substance abuse can all be impacts of child abuse, or can all be effects of child abuse. Sexual abuse. So just a stat here, 1/3 of girls by the age of 18, that's an old stat. And 12 to 18% of boys. Again, I think, Jean, this is a reporting issue on some level. And yeah, it's underreported, especially for boys. And for boys, according to the book, abuse typically occurs outside of the home, and for girls, inside the home. And this can result in anxiety, depression, self-harm, PTSD, substance abuse, suicidality, academic problems, sexual abuse. And sexual abuse, according to, I actually just went to a training. I'm training to become a court-appointed special advocate. So according to their training, sexual abuse does the most harm. But again, all of these things can occur on a continuum. The level of abuse, reactions to abuse, can be manifested in a variety of ways. It in no way means that 1/3 of girls that have been abused are broken. People are resilient, and that's why we're there to help. So obviously it's important to report. This might be one of the most important things that we end up doing as counselors. Failure to report is unethical, unprofessional, and illegal. So don't get yourself in a bind. If you have any doubts, just report. The worst thing that can happen is CPS says, there's nothing to investigate here. So no harm done. You don't have to tell anyone you made the report. There will be documentation that you did it, though. You also want to keep a copy for your records to cross your T's and dot your I's. I can't stress enough how important documentation is, because we're in a very litigious society. So anyway, the ways that we can help families are to help, come up with safety plans, look at family history of abuse. We can help with alternative, punishment systems, managing consequences, different things. But you are not, again, just like with domestic violence, you're not going to be able to be effective with a family unless you're specifically trained, that's actively abusing. So you're going to be making those reports immediately. And if it's a dire situation, you're going to be on the phone with CPS and assisting CPS to come up with a plan to remove the children from the home right then and there. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay. You're also going to want to be careful when you're counseling clients when there's an open investigation. If there's an open CPS investigation, you cannot explore things that are related to the abuse or the investigation unless they come up naturally. And even then, you have to be very, very careful. So you're not going to want to ask any questions about abuse that's occurring in the home while there's an open investigation, because you can tamper the investigation, but also you can re-traumatize the child, kind of like what Jean was talking about with sexual assault, about, every time that's repeated the story over and over again, it gets embedded in the deepest part of their memory. And so we know that, like latest research on crisis counseling tells us that we want to be there, we want to help stabilize, but we're not there to do deep psychoanalytic therapy on site. We need to, we can be there, we can follow up, and work with the kids, but not go deep into their abuse narrative during an open investigation. But afterwards, if this is a teenager and they were abused as a child, or an adult that was abused as a child, and they're in therapy, seeing you after all of the legal and safety issues are resolved, then of course you can process the abuse, validate the client by placing blame where the blame belongs, on the abuser, not the victim. That being said, you can also help the client gain insight into maybe the patterns of family abuse that were occurring in their family. Mental illness as a contributing factor, substance abuse as a contributing factor. We know that all these things are very complex, and not every situation fits all. But you can also help the client, process through their trauma, and help them understand connections between abuse that happened in the past and current pain and maybe patterns of behavior that are manifesting now in their life. And maybe how that's impacting their coping. Does anyone have anything they want to share about this or contribute or questions? Okay. And that is it. I know that was very, very brief. And as I said before, these literally could have entire classes dedicated to each subject. So that was just like the very quick overview. But does anyone have any questions or anything they want to add?
No, everything's great.
Okay, great. Well then, does anyone have any housekeeping questions about assignments or how this will wrap up?
What is our exact due dates for the unessay and for the paper? Because we have stuff to turn in next week. We have an assignment for next week, but then after that, I think that's our last weekly assignment, right? Then it's just the paper and the unessay. When exactly are they due?
I'm going to pull up.
On the syllabus, it says the unessay is due on May the 9th.
Thank you.
And that
quick to the punch.
Paper is due on April the 29th.
That's next week. The paper is actually due next week.
Correct.
No. April 29th is not next week.
Oh, it's only the 18th. Today is the 18th.
Okay. But
so
in 2 weeks.
Yes. I need to reference the syllabus as well. So Jean, if it's on the syllabus and you're reading it, you are correct.
I'm looking at it right now. So for the week 15 from February 23rd to the 29th, that's ethical, legal, and professional issues, Gladden chapter 6, family therapy paper due on the 29th, and the online assignment for 14 due on the 29th. Then for week 16, we're going to have closing reflections from 4:30 to 5:06. And then for the 17th week, that is our finals week from 5:06 to 5:11. And the only project we have is the unessay project due on 5/9.
Okay.
And if you have an unessay project that requires that you physically turn it into me, just make arrangements with me before the 9th, because I'm in and out of the office. But we can do things like I can ask Susie to just unlock my door for you or something like that. If it's a big project that you need to put in my office, and it's a physical project.
My unessay project, I'm not able to submit to you in its entirety, but I can submit the link to you so you can go look at it.
That's perfect.
Is that good? Okay.
Yeah, you guys have freedom with how you want to, with how
Well, I did mine like a Facebook nonprofit and went out and sought out everybody and put them together on a Facebook, and they've been posting for about the last 2 months on it.
Cool. Oh, I'm excited. I can't wait to see what it is.
Not a problem. I was going to ship that out to you this week.
Whenever, and obviously, guys, you can turn your stuff in early. That's not a problem at all. So, it's up to you. Any other questions about major assignments? Nope.
That's it.
Alrighty then. Well, we will end there. Thank you so much for joining us, for joining me for the last class. One last question. Would you all be willing to take like a little Survey Monkey to help me improve the course? I'll just
Sure.
send a link, and then I'll ask a few questions, and then I'll give you some input, because as you all know, I'm a new professor, and I'm new to the online teaching. So I am nascent and in the beginning stages of creating and learning and growing. So I really appreciate all your input.
That sounds great. Send it out to us, and we'll be happy to critique you.
Thank you. Alrighty, well, have a great evening, everyone, and thank you so much. And if you need anything, you know where to find me.
Cool. Sounds good.
All right, bye.